Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving into a highly charged moment from the Singapore Grand Prix weekend. Max Verstappen, the reigning world champion and one of the most straightforward personalities in Formula One, recently found himself at the center of controversy. This time, however, it wasn't his incredible driving skills that stole the headlines, but rather his behavior during an official FIA press conference. Why did Verstappen suddenly shut down during a press conference? What triggered his cold responses and sarcastic attitude? We'll unpack the entire situation here, from the build-up to the fallout, and we'll try to understand what's really going on behind the scenes. To give some context, Verstappen's reaction during the Singapore GP press conference was in response to a punishment handed down by the FIA earlier that week. But this wasn't your usual speeding penalty or grid drop. This was something different, something more personal for Verstappen. It was about something he said, not something he did on the track. So what was the problem? Let's rewind to the Grand Prix in Azerbaijan earlier in the season. After a particularly frustrating race, where things didn't go as planned for Red Bull, Max Verstappen let his emotions get the best of him. In a post-race interview, he bluntly described the state of his car, using some less than appropriate language. Specifically, he said, "The car was F-ed now, in the heat of the moment. It's easy to see how a driver, after a tough race, might let something like that slip." But the FIA, the governing body of motorsport, didn't see it that way. They decided this comment crossed a line and reprimanded Verstappen for using inappropriate language. What was the punishment? The FIA ordered Verstappen to perform a task of public interest as a form of penalty. Essentially, it's a task that's meant to serve as a reminder for drivers to maintain professionalism both on and off the track. Verstappen clearly wasn't pleased with the decision, feeling that the punishment was overly harsh for something he felt was a minor offense. After all, he wasn't cursing at anyone in particular, but rather making a comment about his car's performance. This led to the incident at the Singapore GP press conference. Max Verstappen, still annoyed by what he saw as an unjust punishment, was in no mood to play along with the usual formalities of these media sessions. When reporters asked him questions about his performance during the weekend, his responses were unusually short and dismissive. One particular moment stood out when Verstappen was asked how his car had improved so much between the practice sessions and qualifying. Normally, drivers give detailed insights into how their team managed to tweak the car's setup or solve certain issues. But not this time. Verstappen's response was, "I can't really give you an answer. For all I know, I could get fined for saying something wrong. Maybe they'll even fire me." It was a clear jab at the FIA, who, in Verstappen's eyes, had taken things too far by penalizing him over his language. The tension in the room was palpable. Reporters were visibly caught off guard by his responses, unsure of how to navigate the rest of the press conference. As the session continued, it became evident that Verstappen wasn't going to provide any real answers. There were long, uncomfortable silences where normally there would be in-depth discussions about the weekend's performance. At one point, Verstappen even apologized to the FIA moderator, saying, "It's not directed at you." This was almost like an admission that his frustration wasn't with the individuals in the room, but rather with the larger organization that had handed him the punishment. As the press conference dragged on, Verstappen's sarcasm only grew. When asked if he was concerned about facing more penalties for his behavior, he shot back with a simple, "No comment." It was clear that Max was not going to play by the rules this time. And that's what made this press conference so unusual. Usually, even when drivers are frustrated, they manage to keep things professional. But Verstappen was making a point. He wasn't going to give the FIA the satisfaction of a typical media session. His cold responses created an awkward environment not only for the journalists but also for the other drivers present at the conference. Lando Norris, who had secured pole position, and Lewis Hamilton, who qualified third, could barely get a word in. They were overshadowed by Verstappen's defiant attitude. Every time the focus seemed to shift to someone else, Max would cut in with another dry remark or evasive response. It became more of a standoff than a traditional press event. After the press conference officially ended, things didn't exactly calm down. A group of journalists, eager to get more substantial answers from Verstappen, followed him out of the room. At this point, Max decided to switch gears a bit. Instead of walking away from the press, he suggested doing a walking interview. This move gave Verstappen a sense of control, allowing him to engage on his terms. As they walked, Max opened up slightly more, but the frustration was still evident in his voice. He told the journalists, "I find it ridiculous what happened earlier this week. It's insane. Why would I give real answers in the press conference when I can get punished for saying the wrong thing? I'd rather say as little as possible and save my voice. We can do the interviews somewhere else." His message was clear. He wasn't going to risk another punishment by saying something that could be taken out of context. But what's interesting here is that Verstappen wasn't alone in his feelings. Many other drivers, and even some team principals, seemed to sympathize with his position. Max himself acknowledged this, saying, "It's really clear what everyone thinks. Some are more outspoken about it than others, but we all agree this unity among the drivers highlights a larger issue within Formula One. Drivers are constantly under scrutiny, not just for their performances on the track, but also for their behavior off it. The question is, where should the line be drawn?" Verstappen's frustration seems to come from feeling like the FIA was using him as an example, enforcing rules too strictly to make a point. He said, "They want to make an example out of me. I didn't swear at anyone. I was talking about my car. I don't think I said anything offensive or wrong. This idea of being targeted to set a precedent is something that has happened in other sports as well, where top athletes feel singled out for punishment in order to send a message to others." However, it's also worth considering the FIA's perspective. Formula One is a global sport with a massive audience. The organization wants to maintain a certain level of professionalism, especially when drivers are speaking to the media. In their view, using explicit language during interviews isn't appropriate for the sport's image. So while Verstappen may have felt unfairly targeted, the FIA likely sees this as upholding the standards expected of drivers. Despite the off-track drama, Verstappen still managed to stay focused on his performance during the race weekend. When asked about his second-place qualifying result, he offered a rare moment of genuine reflection. Max explained that his team had made some key improvements to the car between practice and qualifying, saying, "It was tough, but we stayed calm as a team and managed to set the car up much better. It's not perfect, but I haven't felt this comfortable in the car for a long time. Given how bad we expected to be here, second place is more than fine." What's remarkable is that, even with all the noise surrounding his punishment and the press conference drama, Verstappen's competitive mindset remained intact. This is what separates great athletes from the rest. They can compartmentalize the distractions and focus on what really matters, delivering results when it counts. In the end, this entire episode reveals a lot about the current state of Formula One. There's a growing tension between the drivers and the FIA over what is considered acceptable behavior. As Formula One continues to grow in popularity, especially with younger audiences, there's a debate about whether the sport needs to evolve its approach to driver conduct. Should drivers like Verstappen be given more freedom to express themselves, or should the sport maintain its strict standards to protect its image? It's clear that Verstappen isn't afraid to challenge the status quo, and this incident will likely spark further conversations within the sport about how drivers are treated. Regardless of where you stand on the issue, one thing is certain: Verstappen's bold personality, both on and off the track, is part of what makes him such a compelling figure in the world of Formula One. So what do you think? Was the FIA right to punish Verstappen for his comment, or did they overreact? And how should drivers handle these types of situations in the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Verstappen's reaction in the press conference raises even more questions. Was his sarcastic, dismissive behavior a reasonable way of protesting what he saw as an unfair punishment? Or did it cross the line into unprofessionalism? For some, his defiance might be seen as a bold stand against overly strict regulations, while others might argue that there's a better way to handle frustration without undermining the media and the sport's governing body. It's a complex issue that touches on the balance between personal expression and public responsibility.